Welcome to another deep dive. This time around, we're going to be looking at mystery at Camp Oshihapi.
Ah, yes, the book our listener picked out.
Right. And I got to say, I'm pretty curious to see where this conversation takes us because forget your typical summer camp imagery.
Yeah, definitely not your average camp.
No, not even close. This story takes place at Camp Oshihapi and things get a little different. I mean, just from the rules.
The rules. Oh, you mean about the clothing?
Well, yeah, it's like the book lays it out pretty clearly. Shorts and a t-shirt, and that's it.
No, nothing else.
Nope. No underwear, no extras, nothing.
Wow. Okay, so then what's the point of all that? What are they trying to do?
Well, the idea is to recreate the feeling of a classic 1950s or 60s summer camp, but with this added layer of, exploring the human body in a way most people wouldn't even consider.
So it's not just about being, like a nudist colony or something.
Right, exactly. It's deeper than that. And I think that's where the real depth of the story lies.
Yeah, I see that. I can see that. It's like the author is using Camp Oshihapi to make us think about why we have the rules we do. Is it for protection? Is it for control? Or is it something else entirely?
Makes you wonder if maybe we've overcomplicated things, in our modern world.
That's a good point.
And the book follows 5 main characters, the anchor campers. It's really interesting to see how they react to this very unusual environment because, they don't exactly jump in with open arms.
Especially when it comes to the nudity, I bet.
Especially when it comes to the nudity. It's like a total shock to their system.
Well, yeah. I mean, think about it.
And it's fascinating how he even ties in some real-world research on naturism. There's a researcher named Keon West.
You're on West?
Yeah, Keon West. He's done these studies on the impact of social nudity.
Okay.
And his findings actually suggest that it can have a positive effect on body image and self-esteem.
Really? Huh. So like Camp Oshihapi is a testing ground for those theories.
Well, yeah, you could say that, but with like an added layer of adventure and mystery woven in.
It makes you think, right? Like if studies are showing potential benefits, are we missing out on something by clinging so tightly to our clothes? I mean, it's one thing to read research, but to see it played out in a story with characters facing real challenges, that's when it really hits home, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not just about nudity either. These boys, I mean, they find themselves in some pretty intense situations. Like there's this whole scene where they have to rescue a drowning deer from this thick mud.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, talk about facing your fears head on.
I bet. That scene really stood out to me, too, when I read it.
Right. It's just so powerful. Here are these kids stripped down to their most basic selves, and they just jump right in to help this animal in distress.
Yeah, that seems to tie into the whole idea of godly humility that keeps coming up in the book.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, like it's about them learning to act from a place of pure compassion.
Instead of thinking about themselves.
Exactly. Putting aside their own discomfort for the sake of something greater than themselves.
Okay, let's unpack that godly humility concept because it really does feel like a key to understanding the whole story. So what do you make of it?
Well, it's definitely not about weakness or submissiveness. I can tell you that much.
No.
No. The way the author presents it, it's more about shedding ego and recognizing our interconnectedness with all things.
So it's about more than just being humble.
Right. It's about choosing to act from a place of love and service, even when it's, challenging or uncomfortable.
That makes sense, especially considering some of the other events that happen at the camp. Like there's this mysterious boy, Okai. Yeah, okay. He lives in the woods, totally unclothed, and he just pops up throughout the story, seemingly helping the campers when they need it.
Oh, wow. That sounds interesting.
Oh, and get this. The book hints that he might even be an angel.
Oh, come on.
Really?
Really? Which adds a whole other layer to the whole godly humility thing, you know what I mean?
Wow. Yeah, that definitely makes you wonder what the author is trying to say about, the nature of help and where it comes from.
Right. Like, is it always from people we expect?
Aww.
Or can it come from the most unexpected sources?
Yeah, like even something as seemingly fantastical as an angel living in the woods.
Exactly.
It's a good question. It's a really good question.
And then you've got this whole tension between the camp's philosophy and the reactions of, those outside the camp.
Like the clash between the outside world and this little bubble they've created.
Exactly. Like there's a scene where this man sees the boys swimming naked and immediately threatens to call the police. Yeah, geez. But then on the other hand, you've got the local sheriff who seems to understand what Camp Oshihapi is trying to achieve.
And he even sees it as beneficial, especially for troubled youth.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting perspective.
Sure.
He represents authority, and yet he's open to something as unconventional as this.
Right. It makes you think that maybe change is possible even within systems we might assume are like totally rigid and set in their ways.
Yeah, it all comes back to perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. And the book definitely throws a lot of different viewpoints at you. There are even some pretty wild details that add to the whole mystique of the place. Like, they have this tradition called counting coup. Basically, the campers steal each other's belongings.
Steal.
Well, yeah, but then they leave something else in its place.
Oh, so like a trade-off kind of thing.
Right. And it's supposed to be a sign of respect and also a test of their resourcefulness.
It's a curious tradition.
It is.
Yeah.
And at first glance, it seems disruptive, even disrespectful. But if you view it through the lens of the camp's philosophy, it takes on a different meaning.
Yeah, more about adapting and thinking strategically.
Exactly. And relying on your community even when you're being challenged,
Like they're being trained to handle anything that life throws at them.
both literally and metaphorically. And speaking of metaphorical, we can't forget about the Whiskey Twins.
The Whiskey Twins, what's that?
So that's this title they give to pairs of campers who form especially strong bonds.
Oh, interesting. So like best friends.
Yeah. Like best friends, but even deeper than that.
Hmm. I wonder if it's a nod to the idea that deep connections can be forged when you strip away all pretenses and face each other in your most vulnerable state.
I think so. It's a pretty poetic image, isn't it?
It is. The Whiskey Twins.
Uh,
Two souls connected by something deeper than just shared experiences.
Makes me think about the kind of friendships that can develop when you're forced to confront your vulnerabilities and rely on each other for support.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And then there's the camp cook, Silas Greenwood.
Silas Greenwood.
Yeah, he's a former camper himself. He cooks up this meal using rattlesnakes.
Snakes.
Rattlesnakes. And he claims they just happen to die conveniently nearby.
Oh, come on. What are the chances?
Right, like it's a little too convenient. But I think the author is hinting at something deeper here, like this underlying wildness, this connection to nature that runs deeper than just, swimming naked in a lake.
Yeah, I can see that. Silas Greenwood is a fascinating character for
He is. He represents the continuity of the camp's philosophy, someone who's lived it and returned to pass on its lessons.
Almost like a guardian of the camp's spirit.
Exactly. And that rattlesnake meal, it's almost a test.
A test.
Yeah. A challenge to the campers to embrace the unexpected, to push past their initial discomfort, and to discover something new.
A reminder that sometimes the most nourishing experiences come from the most unlikely sources.
I like that. That's a good way to put it.
It's true.
Yeah.
But the camp itself is almost like a living, breathing entity with its own rhythm and way of being.
It's true. And Silas Greenwood, with his, quiet wisdom and his unexpected culinary creations, he's a perfect embodiment of that spirit.
You said it.
It makes you wonder if there are real-world places that foster this kind of connection.
It does.
This sense of shedding all the societal baggage and embracing something more primal and authentic.
Well, I mean, there are definitely movements and communities that explore these ideas.
Right.
But to find a place exactly like Camp Oshihapi, where it all comes together in such a dramatic and intense way,
Yeah.
I mean, that's where fiction really shines, because it allows us to explore these concepts without the constraints of reality.
It's true. It pushes the boundaries and sees what happens when humans strip away everything they think they know.
Right, exactly.
And that brings us to one of the most pivotal moments in the book, Larry's transformation.
Oh, yeah, Larry. He starts out so deeply ashamed of his body.
Haunted by his past trauma.
Right, like he's internalized this idea that his body is something to be hidden, a source of shame.
And then Camp Oshihapi, with its emphasis on acceptance and vulnerability, it provides like a counter-narrative.
Yeah, like he's being reprogrammed to see himself and his body in a whole new light.
Totally. And it all culminates in that scene at the lake, The new campers are all huddled together, clutching their swim trunks.
While the anchor campers are swimming freely, totally unfazed.
And then Larry just makes the decision to strip down, to confront his deepest fear head on.
It's such a powerful moment, not just for Larry, but for like the whole camp community.
What do you mean?
Well, it's like a ripple effect. He takes this incredibly brave step, and then suddenly the other new campers realize that they too can shed the layers of shame and fear.
It's like Larry's vulnerability gives everyone else permission to do the same.
Exactly. To embrace their own imperfections and step into a more authentic version of themselves.
And it's not just about being naked, is it?
No, it's not just about that.
It's about being seen, about being accepted for who you are, flaws and all.
You got it. It's a powerful message about the liberating power of community, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure.
Like when we create environments where vulnerability is not just tolerated, but celebrated, amazing things can happen.
Incredible transformations can occur.
Absolutely. But the story doesn't shy away from the darker side of human nature either.
What do you mean?
Well, remember when the anchor campers stumble upon those criminals hiding out in the woods?
Oh, yeah. That was intense.
It's like a stark reminder that even in a place like Camp Oshihapi, where they're encouraged to, embrace vulnerability, danger still exists out there.
It's a reminder that the world can be a scary place.
It can. And that's where the theme of courage really comes into play.
Oh, how so?
Well, they've been tested throughout the story, right?
Mhm.
Facing their fears about nudity, pushing their physical limits.
Oh, yeah, they definitely had to push themselves.
But this encounter with the criminals, that raises the stakes.
It does. They have to decide whether to act, to risk their own safety, to help someone in need.
And you know what? They don't even hesitate.
They jump right into action.
They do, drawing on all the skills they've learned at camp.
Wilderness survival, teamwork.
Strategic thinking, all of it.
To rescue the missing camper, Chris.
That's the part that really resonated with me,
Ah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to talk about self-discovery and personal growth theoretically.
Yeah.
But to actually see these kids putting those values into action, facing real danger to protect someone vulnerable, that's where the rubber meets the road. You know what I mean?
Totally.
That's where the camp's philosophy truly comes to life.
It's like they're putting everything they've learned into practice.
Exactly.
And they face some pretty intense obstacles along the way, too, like that raging river they have to cross with just a makeshift raft.
Oh, man. That was a nail-biter.
It's almost symbolic, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like they're not just rescuing Chris, they're navigating the turbulent currents of life itself.
And they're not doing it alone.
No, not at all. They have each other, they have Standing Bear's guidance.
And they have this deep well of courage and resourcefulness that's been nurtured at Camp Oshihapi.
It's true. It's like the camp itself is a character in the story, shaping their actions and pushing them to grow beyond their perceived limitations.
I like that. And then there's the aftermath of the rescue.
Yeah. The way the new campers look at the anchor campers with this newfound respect.
It's like the whole dynamic of the community shifts.
Totally. It's like the anchor campers have become living examples of what's possible when you embrace the camp's philosophy. You know what I mean?
Right, like they're showing everyone what it means to live with courage and compassion.
Exactly. It speaks to the power of role models, doesn't it?
It really does. You know, at the beginning of our deep dive, we talked about how this book might challenge our own comfort zones and assumptions.
Yeah.
And there's this one passage that really stuck with me. One of the anchor campers, Josiah, he reflects on the fact that for most of human history, people only had one set of clothes.
Really? Just one?
Yeah. And they wore them for everything. And he connects that to their experience at Camp Oshihapi.
That's interesting.
Like maybe their way of life, while unconventional, is actually more in line with our natural state.
It makes you wonder, right? If
Yeah.
our modern obsession with clothing is more about societal conditioning than anything else.
For sure. Like, are we covering up out of modesty, or are we hiding something deeper?
It's a good question.
And it's not just about clothing either. It's about all the ways in which we've been taught to hide our true selves.
To conform to expectations that might not be serving us.
Exactly. And Camp Oshihapi, in its own radical way, is a challenge to those expectations.
It's an invitation to strip away the layers, to embrace our vulnerabilities.
And to discover the freedom that comes from living authentically.
It's a powerful message.
It is.
Makes you wonder, right? Like, what would happen if we all had a Camp Oshihapi experience?
I know. Would we be so quick to judge others? Those who are different, those who challenge the norms.
Yeah, would we be more willing to embrace our own vulnerabilities?
Yeah.
Step into a more authentic way of being?
It's a fascinating thought experiment, and it actually ties into something you mentioned earlier about that Keon West research on naturism.
Oh, yeah, right.
Because his findings suggest that exposure to social nudity can actually reduce prejudice and increase acceptance of, diverse body types.
Wild, right.
Yeah, it's like Camp Oshihapi is a laboratory for exploring those ideas.
But with a much richer narrative woven in.
Exactly. We're not just talking about statistics and data points. We're seeing how these concepts play out in the lives of, the characters.
Yeah, seeing how their relationships evolve and how their perceptions shift.
It's like a powerful argument for storytelling, you know?
They know.
Like, it helps us understand these complex social issues.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about the impact of creating more spaces like that in the real world.
Spaces where vulnerability and authenticity are encouraged.
Yeah. Where differences are celebrated rather than feared.
I mean, imagine if people felt comfortable expressing themselves without the fear of judgment or shame.
That would be something else.
It would. It's like a utopian vision.
It is a bit, yeah. But the story of Camp Oshihapi suggests that maybe it's not entirely out of reach.
You think so?
I think so. Like, if we're willing to challenge those assumptions, to question the norms we take for granted.
And to create communities where acceptance and empathy are, the guiding principles.
Exactly. And, one of the things that really struck me about this book was the role of the adults.
Oh, yeah, the counselors.
The sheriff.
Even the parents. They're not just background figures. They're actively engaged in the boy's journey.
It's true. They offer guidance, support, and even challenge their perspectives when needed.
Right. It creates this sense of shared responsibility.
Like they're all in this together,
Exactly. Learning and growing alongside the campers.
But it's not always easy for them.
No. They have their own doubts, their own struggles.
To reconcile the camp's philosophy with their own beliefs? Totally.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they choose to embrace the challenge.
They trust the process.
And they allow themselves to be transformed alongside the campers.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
It is.
Such a powerful model of mentorship.
I know. Like, it's not about having all the answers or imposing a specific worldview.
It's about creating a space for exploration and questioning.
For discovering our own truths.
And it's a reminder that learning is a lifelong process, right?
Like, we never stop evolving.
And that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected sources.
Definitely.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Mystery at Camp Oshihapi, what takeaways will you carry with you? What insights resonated with you the most?
For me, it's that reminder that vulnerability is not a weakness.
But a source of strength.
Source of strength. The characters in this story, they embrace their vulnerability.
And shed their masks.
And they allow themselves to be seen.
In their truest form.
Exactly. And in doing so, they discover a depth of connection and a capacity for courage that they never knew they had.
That's powerful. It makes me think about all the ways we try to protect ourselves from vulnerability,
Yeah.
How we build walls and create defenses.
That ultimately isolate us.
From others and from, the fullness of our own experiences.
Well, it's natural, right? Like, it's a natural instinct to want to protect ourselves from pain.
And rejection.
But Mystery at Camp Oshihapi suggests that true growth and connection lie on the other side of those walls.
So it's about taking the risk to be seen, to be vulnerable.
Exactly. To open ourselves up to the possibility of joy and pain.
Which is scary, I'll be honest.
It can be, yeah. It takes courage.
It does. It requires a willingness to challenge our comfort zones.
And it might even mean facing, discomfort or judgment from others.
People who cling to the status quo.
Right. But the rewards, as we've seen in this story, they can be profound.
They can.
It's about discovering a deeper sense of self.
Forging more meaningful connections. And creating a world where vulnerability is not seen as a weakness.
But as a strength.
As empathy, as shared humanity.
Exactly. And that's something we all need, don't you think? Especially in a world that often values image over substance.
Oh, yeah.
Competition over collaboration.
Conformity over individuality.
Mystery at Camp Oshihapi is a reminder that true liberation comes from embracing who we are.
From finding our voices and creating communities where authenticity is celebrated and vulnerability is met with compassion.
And you know what? That journey is available to all of us.
What do you mean?
We don't have to strip down naked in the woods to experience the transformative power of vulnerability and connection.
That's true.
It's about finding ways to be more open and honest.
More authentic in our interactions with ourselves and others.
You got it.
So as you go about your day, I encourage you to carry the spirit of Camp Oshihapi with you.
Yeah.
Challenge your assumptions, embrace vulnerability, and create spaces for authentic connection.
You might be surprised by what you find.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it?
It is.
Well, that concludes our deep dive into Mystery at Camp Oshihapi.
It was a good one.
It was. Thank you all for joining us on this exploration, and may your own journeys be filled with courage, vulnerability, and the transformative power of authentic connection.